Hey guys, welcome to my new YouTube video. This is a continuation of the Nifty series, and today we're going to discuss Tata Motors passenger vehicles. Now, it might look like on the surface that we're discussing an Indian auto OEM, but if I'm being completely honest, 71% of the revenue comes from the JLR, the Jaguar, and the Land Rover brands this company has, which usually do their sales mostly in the US, the UK, China, right? So, thinking of, and if you see the revenue mix, it's been quite consistent. It's not like this is a new thing. For the last 5 years, this has been the mix of the company. JLR has been more than two-thirds of the revenues, right? So thinking of Tata Motors firstly as an Indian auto OEM is conceptually wrong, right? If anything, if you have to study this company, you better study the JLR dynamics rather than the Indian passenger vehicle dynamics, right? Having said that, we'll use this opportunity to get to know the Indian PV side better rather than going into the JLR side, right? Um, so, getting into it, let's look at the industry context. The Indian passenger vehicles, so these are cars that the passengers like you and I use, right? These are not commercial vehicles like tractors or buses, those sort of things. The value chain is pretty simple. There are the raw materials, which are steel, aluminium for the body, lithium, cobalt for the battery, semiconductors, right? Then there are tier one and tier two component suppliers, especially in India, especially in the ICE segment, right? ICE is the internal combustion engine. So there are two types of engines, ICE and now the EVs, the battery backed electric vehicles, right? Battery electric vehicles. And ICE is powered by your petrol, diesel, CNG, those sort of things, right? So tier one, tier two component suppliers have good relationships with the OEMs, long-term contracts. You know, these are lots of companies in India like Motherson Sumi, Minda Corp, Sona BLW. You know, these are companies which are well researched in the Indian space as well. Then you come to the actual OEM assembly and brand layer, in which Tata Motors, the PV part of Tata Motors lies. Then, after all of this is done, the product is ready and the product is sold to the end users, you and I, mostly through dealerships, and this is a franchisee model, right? Um, 75 to 80% of new vehicle transactions are financed, right? So vehicle financing is a big game, or a big part or important part in this entire value chain. Okay, in terms of the across the value chain, if you look, if there's the structural power points or pinch points, there are two, I would say. The power points is number one, raw materials, where a lot of dependencies on China for the raw materials. Okay, so that holds one power point. Okay, the second pinch point or power point is actually the power lies with the OEMs, right? Uh, tier one, especially tier two suppliers don't have a lot of power in negotiations or pricing powers. Dealers are also kind of under the mercy of OEMs if they don't discontinue a product, or they have to manage their inventory. So really, the OEMs hold some power, and the raw material sourcing from China is also a structural pinch point. Tier one suppliers, I wouldn't say they have a lot of pricing power, but they have lock-ins, relationships with OEMs. And after that point, switching costs are there both for the tier one supplier and the OEM, because the tier one supplier has set up industries or so on, and the OEM doesn't want to give the same configurations to someone else, right? So we're starting off with the Indian auto PV industry analysis, and we'll go into more now. All right, getting into the type of players. So this is interesting. In this industry, you can think of one way of understanding the various competition of the various players is by the segment positioning. So, according to segment positioning, there are four categories. This is the entry level of the small cars, then the mass market, then the mid market, usually SUVs in this, and then the premium and luxury, which is like 25L plus. Most of the volume, I would say almost 90% of the volume would be in the mass market and the mid market SUV, right? This is where the most volume is. You can see some of the players as well here. Mahindra and Mahindra is in mid-market SUV. Tata Motors is in mass market and mid-market, right? Um, the big trend, which we'll also see later on, is that, um, or we'll discuss it later, okay? Another way to understand the players is some companies are purely into ICE. Some companies have a dual portfolio, so they make cars both for the ICE engines and the EV engines. And then there are some companies, especially now, which are just EV based. Okay, and then another interesting thing about the companies in this industry are some of them are listed Indian OEMs, right, which is Tata Motors. Some of them are Indian arms of the MNC parent. Okay, for example, Hyundai. Then there are also MNC subsidiaries which are unlisted, and now the Chinese-backed entrants are also there in the EV space. Okay, industrial regulations. There were the cafe phase two norms. So they said, there needs to be a CO2 target emission less than this much. So the companies, generally companies in this industry have to keep upgrading, have to keep their R&Ds high to overcome these norms which keep coming in. Okay, there was a new what is it, NCEP, a new methodology of crash testing which was introduced, um, and the GST Council SUV classification redefinition. So you can read about these regulations more in detail on the portal. I won't get too much into it. Um, in terms of the subsectors in the industry in which this company operates, Tata Motors, especially the Indian arm, the PV arm. So there are two subsectors. There's the ICE PVs and the EV PVs. um, Now let's try to understand the supply side dynamics of this industry. In terms of ICE passenger vehicles, what has happened is there was a huge drop off in FY20 to FY22. There was a huge drop off in the COVID for the sales and the for the sales of these industries, and there's been a rebound after COVID, the COVID comeback, in which the returns of these companies have improved. There's also been exits in the Ford exited in during that time as well, right? So the dislocation which the sector experienced during COVID, right? There was a recovery in that. The exiting of Ford there wasn't a new competitor which came in. So in terms of supply sides, it's been a good picture for this ICE passenger vehicles, right? There is not a lot of capex which happened now. Maruti Suzuki is kind of doing one big capex greenfield, which was coming in, and Mahindra is also doing some capex. So now, after the improvement in the company in the dynamics, the supply side, the sales and profitability of the companies, now some capex is going in, right? But it's nothing to be worried about. There's no boom, or there's no oversupply kind of a situation coming in as of now. Um, the market shares are there. The tailwinds in the ICE is the SUV mix shift happening. Okay, so we saw the two categories, right? The the mass market and the mid-market SUVs. So what has happened structurally is there's been an upgrade in the Indian market where people are wanting to upgrade their cars from normal hatchbacks to SUVs. As you and I might have seen interacting with different people, right? Um, I'm gonna end the industry discussion with you. Okay. Right, so we've kind of discussed the industry in a lot of detail. We've almost taken 10 minutes to understand the industry. There's also the subsector of EV, which is kind of the opposite of ICE, where a lot of capital is flowing in, a lot of players are flowing in, but it's pre-profitability right now. Most of the companies are like Tata Motors is surviving because of PLI incentives, right? So there is huge scope in that, but of course, right now I think in India it's just 3% of volume share, and even in the US it's like 8 to 10% of volume share. So EV, you hear the story of EVs, they're not even taking 10% of the volume share right now. That too, not even in the US has it taken. So India, like it's interesting that there's such a hype around this word, but the transition is not as rapid um, as the buzz is around this. Okay, so you can read more about this. There are other tidbits which are coming to my mind which I want to share, but I'm going to continue. Okay, getting into Tata Motors private vehicles. As I said, 70% of the business is JLR, which we're not covering in this video, which is interesting because 70%, like Tata Motors eventually is that company, not the Indian PV company. But we're taking this opportunity to understand the Indian PV sector better. Revenue, as I said, the Indian PV has been growing faster. There's been a 30% CAGR over the last few years as compared to the JLR CAGR. Um, Now, the JLR revenue surge was driven by there was a mix shift which happened where they really focused on their high margin cars such as the Range Rovers and the Defenders, which kind of led to this great performance by JLR. And in terms of Indian EVs, what's happened is there was the pandemic recovery, but the EVs have contributed, and the new portfolio, SUV portfolio, captured some market share. So Tata Motors PV in the Indian state actually did pretty well. We've seen in the variables, but they actually went from a 4% market share to a 13, then to almost a 14.6 percent market share, and now it's again in the 14 to 15% market share. So Tata Motors did well in terms of gaining market share with all of these new launches that they were doing. Okay, now quickly moving on to the quarterly performance. As you can see, it's not really good, and let's try to understand why these low ratings have been given. Now, as I said, JLR is facing a couple of issues this financial year. They they are facing severe operational and financial headwinds due to a cyber incident which happened, and also the luxury market, the luxury car market in China is facing some depression. There are some taxes which have been um, added. So what's really happening is JLR is facing a tough year, basically FY26. Um, and they've given an EBITDA margin guidance of 0 to 2%. Okay? The Indian PV business, on the other hand, has demonstrated growth, market share gains, improved profitability, and an increasing EV penetration. Okay, consolidated revenue declined, EBITDA margins remained negative, free cash flow was negative. JLR reconfirmed FY26 guidance of 0% EBITDA, right? So, as I said, JLR is the business, is Tata Motors eventually, and it's facing a very, very tough year, basically. Also, China market was impacted, and the US market was also impacted with the tariff situation, right? So yeah, this is a tough time for JLR. Um, but yeah, now we are gonna jump into the key variables. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna ignore this. This is the JLR vehicle marketing expenditure. It's gone up. It's basically an early sign that the revenues are gonna come down. The JLR Range Rover Defender mix. So this was the kind of the strategy or the plan which JLR took to increase its revenues in the past 5 years. From 42% mix, it went up to as high as 77%, and now it's kind of plateauing at 76%. That's incredible. That's the strategy we can clearly see in the numbers. But now what we're seeing is maybe that strategy is played out. It's now plateauing. And for more growth, they might need to look into other aspects, which we'll see soon. There's a JLR electric, the Range Rover electric launch, which is going to happen soon. Okay. Another variable is the private market share. As I said, from 4% to 14% is great. The numbers tell a story that Tata Motors made a re-entry into the Indian PV space. It's doing well. Again, there's going to be a bounce back after the last year. There was a drawdown, but there's going to be a bounce back again this year. The EV sales again are seeing a bounce back. The EV sales went from 19 to 73,000 units, and they dropped last year. But now again they're seeing a rise to 92%. Of course, the market share is falling from 80 to 42%, but so many new entrants coming into the picture, right? As I said, this is a subsector in which capital is flowing and it's booming, right? But everyone is pre-profitability right now. It's 3% of the total volumes. So I don't know. It's not as the picture is. Not, it's a tough space to operate. Things are not very easy. China holds so much supply side power in terms of raw materials. All the suppliers, tier one suppliers, the entire supply chain, the entire industry dynamics are different in the EV space as compared to the ICE space, and it's not easy as of now to operate here. So just no, let's not blindly think that the company is into EV, so it must be doing good for the future. It's a tough space to be in. Okay, the EV beta profitability, it's just broken. It's become profitable, but again, it's due to the PLI support which is there. So we have to understand all of these dynamics. Now, in terms of future market or future growth prospects, what's going to happen is the company has one goal. We want to reach 16% of market share by next year, by this year, FY27, right? So from 14-15%, they want to go to 16%, and they have some launches which are happening in order to achieve this goal. The EV portfolio expansion is also happening with these new launches. Okay, they want their EV penetration to be 20% of their EV portfolio. There's also a Range Rover electric commercial launch which is happening. Although I can't open the timeline here, but there have been some. This has been happening for some time, and probably the commercial launch might happen in FY27. But this is big, right? And then that gives us a base case of 8 to 10% growth for this company in the next 2 years. This is dependent on a lot of things. The JLR production normalizing, which was set back by the cyber incident which happened 1 month of new production or something like that. The market, the demand side recovering, So yeah, it's 8 to 12% growth that we could estimate. 55. There's not a lot of confidence in either of the scenarios because these are not facts. These are probabilistic figures, and we have to read them probabilistically. Seeing this, what I'll say is there's not a lot of clarity on what the growth is going to look like for this company. Quickly, I'm going to skip the guidance section. You can check it out on the portal. The management has been given a credibility verdict of credible based on what they guide in terms of revenues, in terms of other initiatives. So it's decent. There's nothing very bad which is popping out as of now. And that marks this video on TMPV. Thank you.